I was standing in my driveway, arms crossed, staring at the woman who had just pulled up in a white Mercedes SUV with the license plate reading HOA Prez, when I realized this was about to become the most ridiculous confrontation of my life. "Excuse me, are you the new owner of this property?" she asked, stepping out of her vehicle with a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was some kind of legal shield. She had that particular haircut, the one that screams, "Let me speak to your manager," from a mile away, perfectly highlighted blonde hair with chunky streaks that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "I'm Trevor Anderson, yeah. Bought the place 3 months ago. Can I help you?" I kept my tone neutral, though something about her energy already had my guard up. "I'm Patricia Montgomery, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. I've been meaning to stop by and welcome you to the neighborhood, but I couldn't help but notice you've begun construction on a fence." Her smile was tight, practiced, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. I glanced back at the wooden posts I'd spent all morning setting into concrete. "That's right. Property line's been surveyed. Everything's legal and up to code with the county." "Well, that's wonderful that you checked with the county," Patricia said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But you also need to submit your plans to the HOA Architectural Review Board. We have very specific guidelines about fence materials, height, and color. Cedar is not approved. You'll need to use the white vinyl fencing that's been standardized throughout our community." I felt my jaw tighten. "I appreciate you stopping by, Patricia, but I'm not part of your HOA. This property was never included in the Riverside Meadows development. I checked the deed thoroughly before I bought it." Her expression shifted, confusion flickering across her face before hardening into something more aggressive. "That's impossible. Every home on this street is part of our community. We have standards to maintain, property values to protect." "Not this one," I said firmly. "My house was built in 1987, 15 years before your development broke ground. The original owner sold off some of his land to the developer, but kept this lot and the house separate. It's all documented in the county records. I made absolutely sure of it before I made an offer." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll need to verify that with our legal team. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you halt construction until this matter is resolved." "That's not going to happen," I replied. "I've got my building permit from the county, my property survey is clear, and I'm well within my rights." "Have your legal team contact me if there's actually an issue, but I think you'll find I'm right." She clutched her clipboard tighter, knuckles going white. "Mr. Anderson, I don't think you understand how things work in this neighborhood. We have rules for a reason. We can't have eyesores bringing down everyone's property values. That cedar fence is going to look terrible next to the clean, uniform vinyl fencing everyone else has." "Then I guess it'll stand out," I said. "Look, I don't mean to be difficult, but I specifically bought this property because it wasn't part of an HOA. I've lived under HOA rules before, and I'm not doing it again. This is my land, and I'll build whatever fence I want as long as it meets county codes." Patricia's face flushed red. "You're being incredibly selfish. This isn't just about you. Your choices affect the entire community." "I'm not part of your community," I repeated slowly. "I'm your neighbor, but I'm not a member of your association. There's a difference." She opened her mouth to argue further, but I held up my hand. "Patricia, I've got work to do. If your HOA has a legitimate legal claim, have your lawyer send me something in writing. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me get back to my project." For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Her face had gone from red to almost purple, and she was breathing hard through her nose. Finally, she spun on her heel, marched back to her Mercedes, and peeled out of my driveway with enough force to spray gravel across my lawn. I watched her go, then turned back to my fence posts with a sinking feeling that this was far from over. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my front door. It was printed on official-looking letterhead for the Riverside Meadows HOA, addressed to me, and outlined in excruciating detail all the ways my fence violated their community standards. It demanded I cease construction immediately and submit proper plans for a white vinyl fence no taller than 4 feet, with specific measurements and even a list of approved vendors. At the bottom, in bold letters, it threatened daily fines of $200 for non-compliance, starting immediately. I took a photo of the letter and called my real estate attorney, Marcus, who I'd worked with during the purchase of the property. He answered on the third ring, sounding groggy. "Marcus, it's Trevor Anderson. Sorry to call so early, but I've got an HOA problem." That woke him up. "I thought you bought the property specifically because it wasn't in an HOA." I did, and it's not. But the HOA president seems to think otherwise and just threatened me with daily fines. I explained the situation, reading him the letter verbatim. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could hear papers rustling. "Okay, send me photos of that letter. This is harassment, plain and simple. They have no authority over your property whatsoever. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today. In the meantime, keep building your fence. Document everything, every interaction, every letter, every conversation. You think this is going to get worse?" Trevor, in my experience, HOA board members who act like this don't back down easily. They're used to having total control, and someone operating outside their authority drives them crazy. "Yeah, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better." He was right. Over the next week, I continued working on my fence during the evenings and weekends. I had a full-time job as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant in Fort Worth, Texas, so my construction time was limited. But I was making good progress. The cedar posts were set, and I'd started attaching the horizontal rails. Patricia showed up 3 more times. Each visit was more aggressive than the last. She brought other board members, including a thin, nervous man named Gerald, who kept adjusting his glasses, and a heavyset woman named Deborah, who seemed to take pleasure in informing me that my fence was an affront to the community's aesthetic vision. I remained polite but firm. Marcus had sent them the cease and desist letter, which they completely ignored. Instead, they started sending me daily invoices for the supposed fines, each one adding another $200 to a growing total. I threw them all in a folder and kept working. Then things escalated. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening to find orange construction fence wrapped around my property line, and a notice from the county code enforcement office stating that there had been a complaint about unpermitted work. My stomach dropped. I had the permit. I'd checked everything twice. But someone had clearly called in a false report. I immediately drove to the county office, bringing my permit and all my documentation. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Sarah, pulled up my file and frowned. "Sir, you clearly have a valid permit. I'm not sure why you got this notice." "Let me check the complaint." She clicked through her computer, her frown deepening. "The complaint was filed by a Patricia Montgomery, claiming you're doing unpermitted construction that violates local ordinances. But you're in full compliance. I'll void this notice and make a note in the system." "I'm sorry for the confusion. Can I ask what happens if someone files false complaints like this?" Sarah looked up at me, sympathy in her eyes. "If it becomes a pattern, it can be considered harassment and abuse of county resources. If you get any more notices like this, let us know immediately." We take false reporting seriously." I thanked her and drove home, anger simmering in my chest. Patricia wasn't just being a pushy HOA president anymore. She was actively trying to sabotage my project through false reports. That crossed a line. When I pulled into my driveway, Patricia was standing on my front lawn with her phone out, taking pictures of my fence. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed when she saw me. "Mr. Anderson, I'm documenting violations for our records," she announced. "Get off my property," I said, my voice hard. "Right now." "This is a public matter affecting the community," she replied, not moving. "This is private property and you're trespassing. Leave or I'm calling the police." She rolled her eyes but walked toward the street, still snapping photos. "You can't intimidate me, Mr. Anderson. I'm simply protecting our neighborhood." "You filed a false complaint with the county," I said. "That's abuse of government resources. Do it again and I'll pursue legal action." "I filed a legitimate concern," Patricia shot back. "It's not my fault if you managed to fool some clerk into giving you a permit." "I didn't fool anyone. My project is completely legal and you know it. You're harassing me because you can't stand that someone in your vicinity isn't under your control." Her expression turned icy. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. One way or another, you'll comply with community standards, or you'll regret buying that house." She walked back to her Mercedes and drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway, hands clenched into fists. That sounded an awful lot like a threat. I called Marcus again and told him everything. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Trevor, I think it's time to consider a restraining order. Her behavior is crossing into illegal territory. And if she keeps filing false reports, you might want to talk to the police about harassment charges." "Will any of that actually stop her? Maybe. Maybe not. But it creates a legal record. If this goes to court, and I'm starting to think it will, you want documentation of everything she's done." I spent that evening writing down every interaction I'd had with Patricia, every letter, every conversation, with dates and times as best as I could remember. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was back in middle school documenting playground bullying. But Marcus was right. If this continued, I'd need evidence. The next day at work, I was in the middle of a design review meeting when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown local number. I normally wouldn't answer during meetings, but given everything happening, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Is this Trevor Anderson?" a professional female voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Officer Jennifer Watts with the Fort Worth Police Department. We received a complaint about harassment and threatening behavior at your address. Do you have a few minutes to discuss this?" My blood ran cold. "I'm at work right now, but yes, I can talk. What's this about?" "Patricia Montgomery filed a report claiming you've been verbally threatening her and other members of your homeowners association. She says you've been hostile and aggressive, and she's concerned for her safety." "I'd like to hear your side of things." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Officer Watts, I'd be happy to explain, but the truth is exactly the opposite. Patricia has been harassing me for weeks because I'm building a fence on my property. My property is not part of her HOA, which I can prove with documentation, but she's been threatening me with fines, filing false complaints with the county, and trespassing on my property to take photos. I've been nothing but civil, though I did tell her yesterday that if she didn't leave my property, I would call the police. Do you have documentation of this?" "I have letters from the HOA threatening fines, documentation from my attorney showing my property isn't part of their association, records from the county about the false complaint she filed, and I've been keeping a written log of every interaction. I can provide all of it." Officer Watts was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Anderson, I'd like to come by and review this documentation. Would you be available this evening?" "Absolutely. I get home around 6. I'll be there at 6:30. When Officer Watts arrived that evening, she was professional and thorough. She was a woman in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she took her time reviewing every piece of documentation I showed her. She read Marcus's cease and desist letter, the threatening letters from the HOA, my property deed showing I wasn't part of the association, and the notice from the county about the false complaint. "Mr. Anderson, this is pretty clear-cut harassment," she said finally. "Miss Montgomery has made a false report to the police as well. That's a serious matter. What can I do about it? First, I'm going to document this in my report. If she continues this behavior, you can file for a restraining order. You might also want to consider filing a formal harassment complaint. From what you've shown me, you have a strong case. Will she face any consequences for the false police report? That depends on several factors, but yes, filing a false report is a misdemeanor. I'll be following up with her about this. In the meantime, if she contacts you again, comes onto your property, or files any more false reports, call us immediately. Don't engage with her directly anymore." After Officer Watts left, I felt a small measure of relief. At least now there was an official police record of what was happening. But I also felt exhausted. All I wanted to do was build a fence around my property. I'd bought this house specifically to avoid this kind of drama, and yet here I was, stuck in exactly the situation I'd tried to escape. The weekend came, and I was determined to finish the fence. I'd taken Friday off work to dedicate 3 full days to the project. The weather was perfect, cool and clear, ideal for construction work. I was up early Saturday morning, coffee in hand, ready to attach the remaining fence panels. That's when I noticed the vandalism. 3 of the fence posts I'd already set had been kicked or hit hard enough to crack the concrete at their bases. 2 of the horizontal rails I'd attached the previous week were broken, splintered like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them. Paint had been splattered across several sections of completed fencing, crude red streaks that looked like someone had just flung it from a bucket. I stood there, staring at the damage, feeling something between rage and despair. This was thousands of dollars in materials and dozens of hours of work, destroyed in what must have been the middle of the night. I immediately called the police, and then called Marcus. The police arrived first, a different officer this time, a young man named Officer Rodriguez. He walked around the property taking photos and notes. "You have any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I have suspicions, but no proof," I said carefully. "I've been having an ongoing dispute with the HOA president, Patricia Montgomery. She's been trying to force me to take down this fence, even though my property isn't part of her association. It's been escalating." "Has she made any direct threats?" She said I'd regret buying this house if I didn't comply with her demands. "Officer Watts came by earlier this week and documented the harassment. This feels like the next step in that pattern." Officer Rodriguez nodded. "I'll pull up that report and add this to it. Do you have security cameras?" I felt stupid for not thinking of it sooner. "No, but I'm going to install some today." "Good idea. Without video evidence, it's going to be hard to prove who did this. But I'll document everything, and if there's a pattern of escalation with this HOA situation, that helps establish motive." After the police left, I drove to a home electronics store and spent $800 on a complete security camera system. I spent the rest of Saturday installing cameras covering every angle of my property, including the fence line, driveway, and front door. If anyone came near my property again, I'd have video proof. Sunday, I started repairs. The damaged posts had to be dug out and replaced. The broken rails were a total loss. I'd have to buy more materials, which meant another trip to the lumber yard and another dent in my budget. The paint was the worst. I tried everything to remove it, but red paint on raw cedar is nearly impossible to get out completely. I ended up having to sand down those sections and accept that they'd look slightly different from the rest. By Sunday evening, I was exhausted, frustrated, and more determined than ever to finish this fence. Nobody was going to intimidate me off my own property. Monday at work, I got an email. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, Harding and Associates, representing the Riverside Meadows HOA. The email informed me that the HOA was filing a lawsuit against me for violations of community covenants, willful disregard of architectural standards, and creating a nuisance that negatively impacts property values. They were actually suing me. I forwarded the email to Marcus immediately and called him during my lunch break. "I was expecting this," Marcus said, which wasn't particularly comforting. "They're hoping to scare you into backing down. The lawsuit has no merit. Your property isn't part of their HOA, period. But it's going to cost them money to pursue this, and it's going to cost you money to defend against it, even though you're going to win." "How much money? For me to represent you through this?" "Probably $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how far they push it. The good news is that when you win, you can sue them for your legal fees, harassment, and the property damage. You might even get damages for emotional distress, given the pattern of behavior. So I have to spend thousands of dollars. I don't have to fight a lawsuit that shouldn't exist in the first place, just to maybe get that money back later. Unfortunately, yes. That's how they're trying to bully you. They have HOA dues funding their legal adventures. They think you'll cave rather than fight." "Well, they're wrong," I said. "Do what you need to do. I'm not taking that fence down." That evening, I reviewed the security footage from the weekend. Nothing showed anyone approaching the fence during the vandalism period, which meant it had probably happened late Thursday night or early Friday morning, before I installed the cameras. I felt stupid for not having them up sooner. But the cameras did catch something interesting on Monday afternoon while I was at work. Patricia's Mercedes pulled up in front of my house. She got out, walked up to the fence, and stood there for a solid 5 minutes, examining it, taking photos and even tugging on some of the rails, testing their strength. She never came onto my property, stayed carefully on the public sidewalk, but the footage showed her intent focus on my fence. I saved the video and sent it to Marcus and Officer Watts. Over the next 2 weeks, things got stranger. I started receiving mail that wasn't mine, packages addressed to previous residents or random names, all left on my doorstep. At first, I thought it was just postal errors, but then I realized the pattern. Every package was something embarrassing or inappropriate: adult toys, weight loss pills, products for embarrassing medical conditions. Someone was ordering things to my address using fake names, trying to create awkward situations when deliveries arrived. I called the post office and explained the situation. They flagged my address and started returning packages that weren't properly addressed to me. It was a minor annoyance, but it added to the growing pile of harassment tactics. Then my trash cans went missing. I put them out for Tuesday pickup, and when I came home from work, they were gone. Not knocked over or emptied early, completely gone. I found them 2 blocks away in a drainage ditch 3 days later. My mailbox was hit with a baseball bat, bent completely sideways. I had to replace it. Someone filed a complaint with the city about my grass being too long, even though I'd mowed it 3 days before. The city inspector came out, measured it, and confirmed it was well within acceptable limits, but it was another hour of my time dealing with bureaucratic nonsense. Every single incident was captured on my security cameras, but frustratingly, none of them showed who was actually responsible. The vandalism always happened when I was at work or late at night, and whoever was doing it was careful to avoid being caught on camera. But the pattern was clear. This was coordinated harassment, and Patricia Montgomery was at the center of it. Marcus filed our response to the HOA lawsuit, which included a countersuit for harassment, emotional distress, property damage, and legal fees. He also filed for a restraining order against Patricia on my behalf, citing the pattern of behavior and escalating harassment. The court date for the restraining order was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I lived in a constant state of anxiety, wondering what would happen next. The fence was finally finished. Despite everything, despite the vandalism and harassment and stress, I'd completed it. The cedar looked beautiful, rich and natural against the green of my lawn. It was exactly what I'd wanted, exactly what I'd planned when I bought the property. I stood in my backyard, looking at the completed fence with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. It had cost me twice what it should have, both in money and stress, but it was done. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The peace lasted exactly 2 days. I came home from work on Thursday to find a notice on my door from the city electrical department. According to the notice, someone had reported a potential electrical hazard at my property, and they needed to do an inspection. If I didn't schedule it within 5 business days, they'd be forced to shut off my power pending inspection. I called the electrical department immediately, furious. I just bought this house 4 months ago. The electrical system was fully inspected as part of the sale. There's no hazard here. Who reported this? The clerk on the phone sounded apologetic. I can't give out that information, sir, but I can tell you that the report claimed they saw sparks coming from your electrical panel and smelled burning wiring. It's a safety issue. We have to follow up. That's completely false. My panel is fine. Someone is filing false reports to harass me. This is the 5th or 6th fake complaint filed against me in the last month. I understand your frustration, sir, but we still need to do the inspection. It's policy. I scheduled the inspection for the following Monday, which meant taking another half-day off work. I was burning through my paid time off dealing with HOA drama, which was affecting my job performance. My manager had been understanding so far, but I could tell his patience was wearing thin. The electrical inspection went fine, of course. The inspector spent 20 minutes checking everything and confirmed that the system was in perfect working order, recently updated, and posed no safety hazard whatsoever. Whoever reported this was either mistaken or deliberately wasting everyone's time, he said. I'll file my report. You won't have any issues. Can I get a copy of that report? I asked. For legal purposes, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sure. Sounds like you've got some neighbor problems. You have no idea. That evening, I sat down and calculated how much this situation had cost me so far. Materials for the fence, including replacements for damaged sections, came to about $6,000. Legal fees were approaching $8,000. Lost wages from taking time off work were around $2,000. The security system was $800. Various other expenses, replacement mailbox, dealing with fake deliveries, gas money driving around to handle false complaints, probably added another $500. I was $21,300 into this nightmare, and the lawsuit hadn't even gone to court yet. I thought about giving up. For the first time, I seriously considered it. What if I just tore down the cedar fence and put up the stupid white vinyl one they wanted? It would end all of this. I could go back to my normal life, stop hemorrhaging money, Stop living in constant stress. But every time I looked at that fence, I remembered why I'd bought this property. I'd spent years living in an HOA community in Arizona, dealing with constant petty rules and power-hungry board members who measured grass height with rulers and sent violation notices if your car was parked facing the wrong direction in your own driveway. I'd promised myself I'd never live like that again. This property, this house, was supposed to be my freedom from exactly that kind of tyranny. If I gave in now, what did that say? That anyone with enough time and money could bully me into submission. That property rights didn't matter as long as someone was willing to be persistent enough in their harassment. No. I'd see this through, whatever it took. The restraining order hearing arrived on a cold morning in late November. I met Marcus at the courthouse, and we went through security together. Patricia was already there with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, who introduced himself as Richard Harding. We all filed into the small courtroom where Judge Elizabeth Morrison presided. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd clearly seen every kind of petty dispute imaginable in her years on the bench. Marcus presented our case first, walking through the timeline of harassment. He had printed copies of everything: the threatening letters, the false complaints to various government agencies, the police reports, the property damage reports, and the security footage showing Patricia repeatedly coming to my property to photograph the fence. "Your Honor, this is a clear pattern of escalating harassment," Marcus argued. "Miss Montgomery has made it her personal mission to force Mr. Anderson to comply with HOA rules that do not legally apply to his property. When he refused to be intimidated, she escalated to filing false reports, making threats, and we believe, either committing or arranging for vandalism of his property. Mr. Anderson is seeking a restraining order to protect himself from further harassment and to prevent this situation from escalating further." Richard Harding stood up, all confidence and polished charm. "Your Honor, Miss Montgomery is a concerned citizen and HOA president trying to maintain the standards and property values of her community. She has been nothing but professional in her communications with Mr. Anderson. His accusations of harassment are exaggerated and self-serving. As for the property damage, there is no evidence whatsoever connecting Miss Montgomery to those incidents. Mr. Anderson is attempting to use this court to shield himself from legitimate community concerns." Judge Morrison looked at Patricia. "Miss Montgomery, is Mr. Anderson's property part of your homeowners association?" Patricia started to answer, but her lawyer touched her arm and spoke for her. "Your Honor, we believe there may be documentation errors in the property records. We're investigating the chain of title to determine whether Mr. Anderson's property should have been included in the association when it was formed." "That's not what I asked," Judge Morrison said dryly. "I asked if his property is currently part of your association. Yes or no?" Richard Harding shuffled some papers. "The situation is complicated, Your Honor." "It's really not," Marcus interjected. "Mr. Anderson's property was built in 1987. The Riverside Meadows development broke ground in 2002. The property has never been part of the association. It's clearly documented in the county records, which we've submitted as evidence." Judge Morrison spent several minutes reviewing the documents in front of her. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers. Finally, she looked up. "I've reviewed the evidence. Mr. Anderson's property is clearly not part of the Riverside Meadows HOA. There is no ambiguity here. Miss Montgomery, you have no authority over his property whatsoever. None." Patricia's face flushed red, but she stayed silent. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, I'm deeply troubled by the pattern of behavior documented here. Multiple false complaints to government agencies, threatening letters demanding payment for fines you have no authority to levy, repeated unwanted contact, despite being told to cease. This is textbook harassment. She turned to Patricia directly. Miss Montgomery, I'm granting the restraining order. You are to have no contact with Mr. Anderson. You are not to go within 100 feet of his property. You are not to contact him by phone, email, letter, or any other means. You are not to file any complaints about his property with any government agency unless you have actual, legitimate evidence of a code violation. Do you understand? Patricia nodded stiffly, her lawyer whispering something in her ear. And Miss Montgomery, Judge Morrison added, her voice taking on a warning tone, if you violate this order, you will be arrested. I'm making a note in my order that this behavior constitutes a pattern of harassment that, if continued, will result in criminal charges. The court system is not a weapon for you to use against your neighbors because you don't like their fence. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said, her voice tight. Good. Now, regarding the lawsuit. Mr. Harding, does your client intend to continue pursuing litigation claiming HOA authority over property that is clearly not part of your HOA? Richard Harding cleared his throat. We'll need to review our position in light of the court's findings, Your Honor. I suggest you do that very carefully, Judge Morrison said, because if you proceed with a lawsuit that's this clearly without merit, you may find yourselves liable for sanctions and Mr. Anderson's legal fees. This hearing is adjourned. We filed out of the courtroom and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. That went about as well as it could have. Judge Morrison clearly saw through their nonsense. I'd be surprised if they don't drop the lawsuit now. What if they don't? Then we go to court and we win and they pay for it. But my guess is Harding will advise them to cut their losses. As we walked toward the exit, I saw Patricia standing by her Mercedes, talking intensely on her phone. She looked up as we passed, and the hatred in her eyes was palpable. But she didn't say anything, didn't approach us. The restraining order had teeth. 2 days later, Marcus called me with good news. They're dropping the lawsuit. Just got the notice this morning. It's over, Trevor. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. Really? It's actually over. Well, the lawsuit is done. And with the restraining order in place, Patricia can't legally harass you anymore. But Trevor, I want you to keep those cameras running and keep documenting everything. People like her don't always know when to quit. He was right to be cautious. For about a week, everything was quiet. I went to work, came home, enjoyed my house and my beautiful cedar fence. I started to relax, to believe that maybe it really was over. Then I got a call from my homeowner's insurance company. Mr. Anderson, this is Brenda from Lighthouse Insurance. I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about your property. We've been told there are significant fire code violations related to wooden fence placement, and we need to schedule an inspection. If the violations are confirmed, we may need to adjust your coverage or potentially cancel your policy. My heart sank. Who told you this? I can't disclose that information, but it came through an official complaint channel. We take fire safety very seriously. My fence is completely legal and up to code. I have all the permits. This is part of an ongoing harassment situation by a neighbor. She's under a restraining order for this exact kind of behavior. Brenda was quiet for a moment. Sir, if this is a false report, you should document it with law enforcement. But we still need to do our due diligence. Can we schedule an inspection? I scheduled it and immediately called Officer Watts. She answered on the second ring and I explained the situation. This is a violation of the restraining order, she said. Filing false complaints is explicitly prohibited. Do you know for certain it was Patricia Montgomery? Who else would it be? This is exactly what she's been doing for months. I understand, but I need proof. Can you get documentation from the insurance company about who filed the complaint? I called Brenda back and explained that this was part of a criminal harassment case and that the police needed to know who filed the complaint. She said she'd check with her supervisor and get back to me. 3 hours later, she called back. Mr. Anderson, my supervisor reviewed the situation. The complaint came from an anonymous tip through our website, but it was filed from an IP address that we've traced to a Patricia Montgomery. I'm forwarding this information to the police as requested. And for what it's worth, I'm very sorry you're dealing with this. We're canceling the inspection. Your policy is fine. I called Officer Watts back and gave her the information. That's a clear violation, she said. I'm issuing a warrant for her arrest for violating the restraining order. This kind of behavior can't continue. 2 days later, Patricia Montgomery was arrested at her home. According to Officer Watts, she'd been outraged, insisting she'd done nothing wrong, that she was just trying to protect the neighborhood. She was booked, spent a night in jail, and had a court date set for the following month. The arrest sent shockwaves through the Riverside Meadows community. I started getting visitors, neighbors I'd never met, stopping by to apologize or to share their own horror stories about Patricia and the HOA board. A woman named Linda from 3 streets over told me she'd been fined $5,000 for painting her shutters the wrong shade of beige. I mean, it was beige, she said, exasperated. But apparently it wasn't the approved beige from the approved vendor list. I ended up repainting them just to get her off my back. A man named Robert shared that he'd been threatened with liens on his property because he'd installed solar panels without HOA approval. The panels are on the back of my roof, barely visible from the street, but Patricia said they violated the aesthetic standards. I had to hire a lawyer to fight it. Story after story, all variations on the same theme. Patricia had been ruling the HOA like a personal fiefdom, using her position to bully and control everyone around her. My situation had finally brought it all to light. The HOA held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia from the board. She tried to fight it, but the vote was overwhelming. Apparently, a lot of people had been waiting for an opportunity to push back against her reign. When her court date arrived for the restraining order violation, I attended. Marcus came with me, though I wasn't required to be there. I just wanted to see it through. Patricia showed up with Richard Harding again, but the case was straightforward. The insurance company had provided documentation showing she'd filed the false complaint using her home IP address. She couldn't deny it. Judge Morrison looked even less pleased than she had at the previous hearing. Miss Montgomery, I gave you a very clear order. I specifically told you what would happen if you violated it. You chose to disregard that order less than 2 weeks after it was issued. Your Honor, I was concerned about fire safety in the neighborhood, Patricia started, but Judge Morrison cut her off. You were concerned about control. You were concerned that Mr. Anderson had successfully defied your authority. So you filed another false complaint, this time to his insurance company, trying to cause him financial harm. That's not just a violation of the restraining order. That's potentially insurance fraud, filing a false complaint with the intent to cause policy changes or cancellation. Patricia went pale. I'm finding you in contempt of court for violating the restraining order. I'm sentencing you to 30 days in county jail, suspended pending completion of anger management counseling and community service. You will complete 100 hours of community service and attend weekly anger management sessions for 6 months. If you violate any terms of this sentence or have any contact whatsoever with Mr. Anderson, you will serve the full 30 days. Additionally, I'm referring the insurance fraud matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Your Honor, that's excessive, Richard Harding started to argue, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. Mr. Harding, your client has repeatedly used government systems and legal processes as weapons against a man whose only crime was building a fence on his own property. She's filed false reports with code enforcement, the police, and an insurance company. She's cost Mr. Anderson thousands of dollars and countless hours of stress and anxiety. If anything, I'm being lenient. This hearing is adjourned. As I left the courtroom, I felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for months. It wasn't quite over. Patricia still had to complete her sentencing requirements, and the district attorney still had to decide about the fraud charges, but the worst was behind me. Marcus and I went to lunch at a diner near the courthouse. Over burgers and coffee, we talked through the next steps. You could sue her personally for damages, Marcus said. Between the property damage, your legal fees, lost wages, and emotional distress, you've got a solid case. We could probably get a judgment for $40,000 or $50,000. Would I actually collect any of it? I asked. That's the question. If she has assets, yes, but collecting judgments can be tricky. It might cost you more in legal fees to pursue it, and there's no guarantee of recovery. I thought about it while I ate. Part of me wanted to pursue every possible avenue to make Patricia pay for what she'd put me through. But another part of me was just exhausted. I wanted my life back. I wanted to enjoy my house and my fence and not spend any more time or money on this nightmare. Let's see what the DA does with the fraud charges, I said finally. If they prosecute, that's consequence enough for me. If they don't, maybe I'll reconsider the civil suit. But right now, I just want to be done with this. Marcus nodded, understanding. That's fair. You've been through a lot. Just know the options there if you change your mind. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. I went to work, came home, worked on small projects around the house. I planted some shrubs along the fence line, and they looked great against the cedar. I set up a small patio in the backyard and bought a grill. On weekends, I'd sit outside with a beer, looking at my fence, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond just the construction project. The district attorney decided to pursue charges against Patricia for insurance fraud and filing false police reports. Both were misdemeanors, but they carried potential jail time and fines. Her lawyer worked out a plea deal. She pled guilty to filing false reports, the fraud charge was dropped, and she received 2 years of probation, more community service, and a $5,000 fine. The new HOA board reached out to me with an apology letter, explaining that they were reforming their processes and trying to rebuild trust in the community. They made it clear they understood my property wasn't part of their association and that I'd never hear from them again. I appreciated the gesture. Linda and Robert, the neighbors who'd shared their own HOA horror stories, became good friends. We'd get together sometimes for barbecues in my backyard, and they'd joke about my outlaw fence that had brought down Patricia's reign of terror. "You did what none of us had the guts to do," Robert said one evening over beers. "You just said no and stuck with it. I wish I'd done that with the solar panels instead of spending $3,000 on lawyers." "Sometimes standing up for yourself is expensive," I said, "but it's worth it." My homeowner's insurance sent me a letter apologizing for the confusion and assuring me that my policy was secure, and that they'd flagged Patricia in their system as having filed false reports. Small victories. Marcus and I stayed in touch, and eventually he sent me a final accounting of all the costs. With the lawsuit dropped and the criminal case resolved, my total legal fees came to about $9,000. Combined with everything else, the whole ordeal had cost me roughly $24,000 and countless hours of stress. But every time I looked at that cedar fence, I knew it was worth it. 6 months after Patricia's arrest, I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon when a car pulled up. I tensed, old habits from months of harassment dying hard, but relaxed when I saw it was Officer Watts. She got out and walked up with a smile. "Hey, Trevor. Just wanted to stop by and let you know Patricia Montgomery completed her probation requirements. Anger management, community service, all of it. She's done, and she stayed far away from you. Thought you'd want to know." "Thanks for telling me," I said. "And thanks for everything you did. I don't think I could have gotten through this without the police taking it seriously." "That's our job," she said. "But between you and me, cases like this are frustrating. HOA disputes waste so much time and resources, and they're almost always about petty power trips rather than legitimate issues. I'm glad yours got resolved." After she left, I went back inside and looked around my house. It wasn't fancy. It was a modest 3-bedroom built in the 80s with outdated fixtures and flooring that would need replacing eventually. But it was mine, truly mine, with no HOA to answer to, no architectural review board to approve my choices, no power-hungry board president to measure my grass or judge my fence. That evening, I invited Linda and Robert over for dinner. We grilled steaks, drank wine, and talked about everything except HOAs and fences and lawsuits. We talked about work and hobbies and travel plans and all the normal things people talk about when they're not in the middle of legal nightmares. As the sun set behind my cedar fence, casting long shadows across the backyard, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Real, genuine peace. The fence stood strong and beautiful, weathering to a natural silver gray as cedar does. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. That standing up for your rights has costs, but those costs are worth paying. That property rights matter, and that no one, not a power-hungry HOA president or anyone else, gets to take them away without a fight. I'd bought this property to escape HOA tyranny, and despite Patricia's best efforts to drag me back into that world, I'd succeeded. My property remained independent, my fence remained standing, and my freedom remained intact in the end. That's what it was really about. Freedom. The freedom to make decisions about my own property without asking permission from people who had no authority over me. The freedom to build what I wanted, how I wanted, as long as it was legal and safe. The freedom to live my life without constant scrutiny and petty rules. That freedom had cost me $24,000 and 6 months of stress. But as I sat in my backyard that evening, watching the stars come out above my fence, I knew without question that it was worth every penny and every sleepless night. A few months later, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a local news reporter named Jessica, asking if I'd be willing to be interviewed about my experience with HOA overreach. Apparently, my case had made the rounds in legal circles and HOA reform communities, and people were interested in hearing my story. I thought about it for a few days. Part of me wanted to just move on and never think about any of this again. But another part remembered all the neighbors who'd shared their own horror stories, people who'd given in to unreasonable demands because fighting back seemed too expensive or too difficult. I agreed to the interview. The article ran in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram a few weeks later. It detailed the whole saga, from Patricia's first visit to her arrest and conviction. The reporter interviewed Marcus, Officer Watts, and several of my neighbors. She even got a comment from the new HOA board president, who acknowledged that the previous board had overstepped its authority and implemented reforms to prevent similar situations. The article went viral locally, then got picked up by national news outlets. Suddenly, I was getting emails and calls from people all over the country who'd had similar experiences with overreaching HOAs. Some had fought back successfully. Many had given in. All of them felt powerless against organizations that wielded rules and fees like weapons. A local real estate attorney reached out and asked if I'd be willing to speak at a seminar about HOA issues. I agreed and found myself standing in front of a room full of homeowners, real estate professionals, and attorneys, telling my story. The key thing to understand, I told the audience, is that HOAs only have the power you give them. If your property isn't part of the association, they have no authority over you, period. And if they try to claim authority, they don't have. Document everything and get legal help early. Don't wait until you're buried in fake fines and false complaints. A woman in the audience raised her hand. But what if you can't afford a lawyer? Most people don't have thousands of dollars sitting around for legal fees. It was a fair question, and I didn't have a perfect answer. You're right, and that's exactly how organizations like this bully people. They know most individuals don't have the resources to fight back. My advice is to look for lawyers who will work on contingency, where they only get paid if you win. Some will take HOA cases that way, especially if the facts are clearly on your side. Also, document everything yourself. Photos, written logs, recordings if your state allows it. Good documentation can sometimes prevent things from escalating to the point where you need expensive legal help. After the seminar, several people came up to thank me and share their own stories. It was both encouraging and depressing to realize how common these situations were. But here's what struck me most. Almost everyone who'd fought back against HOA overreach was glad they did, regardless of the cost. And almost everyone who'd given in regretted it. There was something psychologically corrosive about being bullied on your own property, about feeling like you didn't have control over your own home. The fence became something of a local landmark. People would drive by just to see the fence that defeated the HOA. Realtors used my story as a selling point for non-HOA properties in the area. Remember that case with Patricia Montgomery and the cedar fence? This property is just like that one, completely independent. A year after the whole ordeal ended, I was working in my front yard when a moving truck pulled up across the street. A new family was moving into one of the HOA properties. I watched them unload boxes and furniture, and eventually wandered over to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Trevor Anderson from across the street. Welcome to the neighborhood." The husband, a friendly-looking guy in his 30s, shook my hand enthusiastically. "Thanks, I'm Mike. This is my wife, Sarah. We're excited to be here." "Hey, wait, are you the guy with the famous fence?" I laughed. "Guilty? That's me. Dude, we read about that whole situation. Actually, part of why we felt okay buying in this HOA is because we heard they completely reformed after what happened with you. New board, new policies, way more reasonable." "That's good to hear," I said. "The new board sent me an apology letter last year. They seem like decent people." "Well, if they give us any trouble, we know who to call," Sarah joked. "The fence guy." We all laughed, and I helped them unload some boxes. As I walked back to my house later, I felt good about how things had turned out. Not just for me, but for the whole community. Sometimes standing up to bullies creates positive change beyond just your own situation. The legal bills were eventually paid off. The fence continued to age beautifully, requiring minimal maintenance. My security cameras stayed up, though I stopped checking them obsessively after the first year. Patricia Montgomery, as far as I knew, had moved to a different neighborhood. Good riddance. Life went on. I got promoted at work. I started dating someone, a woman named Taylor who thought the whole fence saga was hilarious and admired me for sticking to my principles. She'd grown up in an HOA community and hated it, so we bonded over our shared appreciation for property freedom. On the 2-year anniversary of finishing the fence, Taylor and I threw a big party in the backyard. We invited everyone who'd helped me through the ordeal. Marcus and his wife, Officer Watts and her husband, Linda and Robert and their spouses, even the county inspector who'd confirmed my permits were valid. We grilled burgers and drank beer and celebrated not just the fence, but the principle it represented. Marcus raised his beer bottle in a toast to Trevor, who reminded us all that property rights matter, that bullies don't always win, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to back down when you know you're right. Everyone cheered, and I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Yes, the whole experience had been expensive and stressful and sometimes terrifying. But it had also connected me with good people, taught me about standing up for myself, and given me a story I'd be telling for the rest of my life. As the party wound down and people started leaving, Taylor and I sat on the patio, looking at the fence in the golden light of early evening. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Fighting so hard, I mean. It cost you so much money and stress." I thought about the question seriously, because she deserved a real answer. Sometimes in the moment I did. There were nights I couldn't sleep, wondering if I was being stubborn for no good reason. But no, looking back, I don't regret it at all. This fence represents something bigger than just cedar posts and rails. It represents the right to make decisions about my own property. If I'd caved to Patricia's demands, I'd be looking at a white vinyl fence right now, hating it every day, feeling like I'd betrayed myself. "I think you did the right thing," Taylor said. "And I think it's sexy that you stood up for yourself," I laughed. "Sexy? That's a weird takeaway from an HOA dispute." "Hey, confidence is sexy, principles are sexy, and honestly this fence is sexy too. It's way better than the boring white vinyl stuff." We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set through the cedar slats, and I realized that this moment, this feeling of peace and contentment in my own backyard, was exactly what I'd been fighting for all along. The fence still stands today, strong and weathered and beautiful. It's a monument to property rights, to the importance of standing up for yourself, and to the simple truth that sometimes the hardest fights are the most worthwhile. And every time I look at it, I smile, remembering Patricia's face when Judge Morrison told her she had no authority over my property. That alone was worth the price of admission.